The fluorescent lights of Forward Operating Base Scorpions Field Hospital hummed their mechanical lullaby through the Afghan night. It was 02:15 hours, that dead space between midnight and dawn when the human body craves sleep most desperately, when alertness drops to its lowest point, when soldiers on watch have to fight their own biology to keep their eyes open. Captain Rebecca Caldwell moved between the hospital beds with a grace that seemed almost supernatural in its quietness. Her navy blue scrubs were crisp despite the oppressive heat that lingered even at this hour, despite the dust that infiltrated everything in this godforsaken corner of Kunar province. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a tight bun that revealed a face more suited to kindness than the harsh realities of war. High cheekbones softened by gentle eyes, a mouth that seemed built for reassuring words rather than giving orders. She paused at bed 7, where a young Marine named Corporal Davies struggled with his breathing. The kid couldn't have been more than 23. His chest rose and fell with effort, each breath a small victory against the shrapnel wounds that had torn through his left lung 3 days prior. Rebecca's fingers found his wrist, checking his pulse with practiced efficiency. 58 beats per minute, steady, strong enough. Her other hand adjusted the pulse oximetry clip on his index finger, watching the digital readout climb from 89% to 92%. "There you go," she murmured, her voice carrying that particular quality of calm that could steady panicked soldiers and soothe fevered patients with equal effectiveness. "Just keep breathing, Corporal. Nice and easy." She turned to adjust his morphine drip, 2 milligrams per hour, standard protocol for thoracic trauma, when she caught herself doing it again. That thing she tried so hard not to do anymore. Her eyes had swept the room in a tactical assessment so automatic she barely registered it. 3 exits, main entrance at 12 o'clock, supply corridor at 3 o'clock, emergency egress at 7 o'clock. The main entrance offered no cover for the first 4 meters. The supply corridor had good concealment, but poor cover. Canvas walls wouldn't stop rounds. The emergency exit was the best tactical choice if things went sideways. 32 beds total, 14 currently occupied. The patients nearest the exterior walls would be most vulnerable to indirect fire. The ones in the center of the ward had the best chance if mortars started falling. She forced the thoughts away, focusing instead on Corporal Davies's IV line, checking for infiltration at the insertion site. This was who she was now, a nurse, a healer, someone who saved lives instead of taking them. At least that's what she told herself every single day for the past 3 years. "Captain Caldwell?" She turned to find Private First Class Garrett Hollis standing behind her, clipboard in hand, his young face drawn with exhaustion. Hollis was 22, fresh out of Field Medical Service School, and this was his first deployment. He'd been at FOB Scorpion for exactly 3 weeks, still jumping at the distant thump of artillery fire that echoed from the mountains, still flinching when the base's generators kicked on with their diesel roar. Rebecca never flinched. Not once, not ever. Hollis found that both comforting and slightly unnerving. "Vitals are stable on bed 7, she said, making a notation on his clipboard. "But watch his O2 saturation closely. If it drops below 92 again, I want to know immediately. And check his chest tube output every hour. I don't like how much blood we're seeing in the collection chamber." "Yes, ma'am." Hollis scribbled notes with the desperate intensity of someone who knew he was in over his head. "Captain, can I ask you something?" Rebecca glanced at him, waiting. "How do you stay so calm? I mean, all the time. Even during the mass casualty drill yesterday, you were just steady, like this is all normal." She considered the question for a moment. How to explain 16 years of experience without revealing what those 16 years actually contained? How to describe the kind of calm that comes from having looked through a rifle scope at another human being and made the conscious decision to end their life? That came from having done it 47 times? "Experience, Hollis," she said simply. "You do this long enough, You learn to control your reactions. The patients need you to be their anchor. If you panic, they panic, so you don't panic. It was a true answer, just not the whole truth. The whole truth was locked in a footlocker under her bunk in the plywood quarters she called home for this deployment. The whole truth had a body count attached to it. "Yes, ma'am," Hollis said, though he didn't look entirely convinced. "I'll keep monitoring Davies." Rebecca moved on to bed 12, where an Afghan farmer lay recovering from 70% body burns. The man's wife hadn't made it. They'd lost her on the table 2 days ago, her abdominal cavity too torn apart by Taliban rifle fire to save. Their 10-year-old son was in bed 13, recovering from shrapnel wounds to his chest and arms. She checked the farmer's IV, his fluid resuscitation rates, the Silvadene cream coverage on his burns. Professional, efficient, gentle. But inside, a different part of her brain was working. The part she couldn't fully shut down, no matter how hard she tried. The Taliban who'd attacked their village would have used AK-47s, probably the Chinese Type 56 variant that flooded this region. 7.62 by 39 millimeter Soviet rounds. Effective range of 350 meters, though most fighters couldn't hit anything beyond 100. The insurgents had probably set up an ambush along the village's main road, catching civilians in a classic L-shaped kill zone. Standard tactics, predictable, brutal. If she'd been there, if she'd been the woman she used to be, she could have stopped it. One shooter, one rifle, one well-placed hide overlooking that village. She could have identified the fighters before they ever set up their ambush, could have called in their position to a quick reaction force, or simply eliminated them herself from distance. But she hadn't been there, because she wasn't that woman anymore. The farmer would live, his son would live, but their wife and mother was being prepared for burial in the base morgue, and no amount of guilt or tactical knowledge could change that. Rebecca adjusted the boy's blanket, pulling it higher around his small shoulders. The child stirred in his sleep, murmuring something in Pashto she couldn't fully understand. For just a moment, less than a heartbeat, something flickered across Rebecca's face. An emotion too complex to name. Rage at the people who'd done this. Grief for the mother who died. Frustration at her own helplessness despite all her skills. Then the professional mask returned, smooth and impenetrable. "Captain Caldwell." The voice came from behind her, deeper than Hollis's, carrying an edge of authority that made her spine straighten automatically before she consciously registered who was speaking. She turned to find Major David Reeves standing in the entrance to the surgical suite. He was 41 years old, tall with the kind of angular features that suggested Germanic ancestry, and intelligent gray eyes that missed very little. He'd arrived at FOB Scorpion 5 days ago, transferred from a trauma hospital in Kandahar, and he'd been watching Rebecca ever since. Not obviously, not inappropriately, but watching nonetheless. "Major," Rebecca acknowledged, keeping her voice neutral. Reeves stepped closer, his surgical scrubs still stained with blood from an operation earlier that evening. A Marine with a collapsed lung, successfully reinflated. The kid would make it. "That arterial bleed yesterday," Reeves said without preamble. "Sergeant Whitford, the way you handled it." Rebecca waited. She'd learned long ago that silence was often the best response when someone was building up to something. "I've worked with a lot of combat nurses, Captain. 20 years in military medicine. I've seen nurses who are good under pressure, nurses who can function in chaos." He paused, his eyes searching her face. "You're different. The way you made decisions, no hesitation, no panic, no second guessing. You move like someone with combat experience that goes beyond medical training." 8 years deployed gives you confidence, sir," Rebecca replied, the deflection smooth and practiced. 3 years, Reeves corrected gently. "I checked your service jacket. It says you've been a nurse for 3 years, not 8. But earlier today you mentioned 16 years deployed. That math doesn't add up, Captain. Where were you the other 13? Rebecca felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came whenever someone got too close to the truth. But her face remained placid, her voice steady. Different unit, different life, different me. Reeves studied her for a long moment. In the harsh, fluorescent lighting, Rebecca could see the calculation in his eyes, the pieces he was trying to fit together, the puzzle he couldn't quite solve. "You move like infantry," he said finally. "The way you scan rooms when you enter, how you position yourself with your back to walls, the situational awareness you maintain, even while you're focused on patient care." He paused. "That's not nursing school, Captain. That's something else entirely." Rebecca's jaw tensed for just a fraction of a second before she caught herself. "Medical training in combat zones teaches you to stay aware of your surroundings, Major. It's basic survival." "Is it?" Reeves didn't look convinced. "Because I've deployed to 4 war zones, and I've never seen a nurse clear corners the way you do. I've never seen one automatically position themselves to maintain visual on all entrances while administering medication." The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Rebecca broke it first, her voice taking on a subtle edge of professional distance. "Is there something specific you need, Major? Because I have 14 patients to monitor, and at least 3 of them are critical enough to require constant observation." Reeves recognized the dismissal for what it was. He nodded slowly, but his eyes held something new now. Not suspicion exactly, more like determination to solve the mystery she represented. "No, Captain, that'll be all." He turned to go, then paused. "But for what it's worth, whatever you did before nursing, whatever made you move the way you do, I'm glad you're here. We need people who stay calm when things go to hell." He disappeared back into the surgical suite, leaving Rebecca alone with her thoughts and her carefully constructed lies. She returned to her rounds, checking vitals, adjusting medications, offering comfort to men who were far from home and hurting in ways that went beyond their physical wounds. This was her penance. This was her redemption. Taking care of people instead of putting them in the ground. But Reeves wasn't wrong. She did move differently. She couldn't help it any more than she could help breathing. 16 years of training had carved pathways into her brain that refused to fade, reflexes that wouldn't die no matter how much she wanted them to. At 03:42 hours, she finally took her break, escaping to the supply room ostensibly to check inventory. The small space was lined with metal shelving units, stacked with bandages, medications, IV fluids, surgical supplies. Everything organized with military precision. Rebecca closed the door behind her and allowed herself 30 seconds to not be the calm, professional nurse everyone expected. Her hands were shaking slightly, not from fear or stress, but from the effort of holding herself in check, from the constant vigilance required to monitor her own behavior, to catch herself before she revealed too much. She moved to the back of the supply room, to the locked cabinet that held the controlled medications. Morphine, fentanyl, ketamine, life-saving drugs that could also end lives in the wrong hands. Her hands found the lock without looking, muscle memory guiding her fingers through the combination. But she wasn't checking the medications. Behind the drug cabinet, hidden in a space only she knew about, was her footlocker. The small one that contained pieces of a life she'd tried to leave behind. She didn't open it. Didn't need to. She knew exactly what was inside. A ghillie suit, custom-built for the terrain of Afghanistan's mountainous regions. Strips of burlap and canvas in browns and tans and grays, designed to make a human silhouette disappear into rocks and earth. Range cards, meticulously drawn in her own hand. Distances calculated to the meter. Wind patterns mapped by season. Elevation compensations for different valleys. The accumulated knowledge of dozens of operations, hundreds of hours lying motionless in hides, watching and waiting. A Scout Sniper Badge, number 287, earned through 8 months of the most brutal training the Marine Corps could devise. Earned through pain and deprivation, and the absolute refusal to quit, even when her body screamed for mercy. And the photograph. 5 Marines in desert Marpat camouflage, arms around each other, genuine smiles beneath the weight of war. Rebecca recognized the woman she used to be, harder, leaner, with eyes that had seen too much death. Beside her stood Staff Sergeant Marcus Hawkins, call sign Priest, her spotter and best friend. Behind them, 3 other Marines whose names she carried like stones in her heart. All 4 men were dead now. Priest had died in her arms during an ambush in Helmand Province in 2018, his blood soaking into the sand while she screamed for a medic who couldn't reach them in time. She'd killed the 6 insurgents who set the trap, killed them with a rage and precision that scared even her, but it didn't matter. Priest was gone. The other 3 had followed over the next 2 years. Different operations, different circumstances, same ending. She was the only survivor of that photograph, the only one who'd made it home. Except she hadn't really come home, had she? She just changed locations, changed uniforms, changed her job description from eliminate threats to preserve life. But the war followed her. It always would. Rebecca closed the cabinet without opening the footlocker. Some doors were better left closed. Some ghosts were better left undisturbed. She took a breath, forced her hands to steady, and put her professional mask back in place. When she emerged from the supply room, she was Captain Caldwell again. Calm, competent, caring. The nurse who nobody suspected had once been the most dangerous woman in Helmand Province. The rest of the night passed in the usual rhythm of military medicine. Check vitals, administer medications, monitor critical patients, offer comfort where comfort could be given. Rebecca moved through it all with her characteristic efficiency, and if Hollis or any of the other medics noticed that she positioned herself where she could always see the entrances, where she always kept her back to solid walls, they didn't comment on it. At 0547 hours, just as false dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, the base's emergency alert system crackled to life. All personnel, this is base operations. Be advised we have received intelligence reports of confirmed hostile activity in the Korengal Valley. Large insurgent force assembling. Current threat assessment has been elevated to amber. Repeat, threat level amber. All units prepare for possible contact within the next 48 to 72 hours. Rebecca's head came up sharply, her body going still in a way that had nothing to do with medical training and everything to do with combat instinct. Korengal Valley, 8 kilometers northeast of their position. Perfect terrain for staging an assault, dozens of wadis and ridgelines that could hide troop movements, with clear lines of approach to FOB Scorpion. And 48 to 72 hours meant the Taliban were already moving into position. She glanced at the hospital's eastern wall, just canvas and plywood, reinforced with sandbags, but nothing that would stop determined fighters with automatic weapons. The hospital was on the base's eastern perimeter, which meant it would be in the direct line of any assault from Korengal. Without thinking, her tactical mind started running calculations. Likely approach routes, probable objectives, expected tactics. If she were planning an assault on this base, she'd use the dried wadi that ran along the eastern perimeter. It provided concealed approach to within 80 meters of the hospital. She'd hit just before dawn, when guards were most tired. She'd use mortars first to suppress response, then send dismounted infantry through the breach. Captain Caldwell? She turned to find Hollis standing beside her, his face pale in the emergency lighting. That alert, does that mean they're going to attack us? Rebecca looked at the young medic, 22 years old, 3 weeks in country, probably never fired his rifle outside of qualification ranges back home. It means they might, she said gently, but we have good people on security. Master Sergeant McAllister has been doing base defense for 24 years. If anyone can keep us safe, it's him. The words felt hollow even as she said them, because she'd already identified the vulnerability in the eastern perimeter, already seen the dead space in their defensive coverage, and she had the terrible feeling that nobody was going to listen to a nurse's tactical assessment. Not until it was too late. At 6:30 hours, Colonel Thaddeus Grayson called an emergency briefing in the base operations center. Rebecca wasn't invited. Medical staff rarely were unless they needed to coordinate for mass casualties. But she found a reason to be nearby, close enough to overhear through the plywood walls. "Gentlemen," Colonel Grayson's voice carried the gravel of 30 years in the Marine Corps. "SIGINT confirms approximately 30 to 40 Taliban fighters have been assembling in the Korangal Valley over the past 72 hours. Local sources indicate they're planning a coordinated assault on this FOB. Timeline is fuzzy, but current estimate puts it at 48 to 96 hours from now." Rebecca shifted position, pressing closer to the wall. "Sir, what's their probable objective?" That was Captain Vivian Locke, the S2 intelligence officer. "Best guess? They want to overrun our position, destroy equipment, inflict maximum casualties, and get out before air support can respond. Classic Taliban playbook. Hit hard, hit fast, fade back into the mountains." "What about our defensive posture?" A new voice, Master Sergeant Rourke McAllister, Base Security Chief. "We're implementing enhanced security protocols immediately. All guard posts doubled, increased patrol frequency. I want you to walk the perimeter personally, Master Sergeant. Look for vulnerabilities." Rebecca almost moved then. Almost walked into that briefing and pointed out the Eastern Wadi approach. Almost revealed the tactical knowledge that would raise questions she didn't want to answer. But before she could make the decision, McAllister's voice came through the wall. "Sir, I'll conduct a full assessment, but I can tell you right now, our eastern perimeter is solid. We've got good observation posts, overlapping fields of fire, proper standoff distance. If they come from that direction, we'll see them well before they're a threat." Rebecca's jaw clenched. He was wrong. She could prove it with a 10-minute terrain walk. But proving it would require explaining how a nurse knew enough about infantry tactics to identify defensive gaps that a 24-year security veteran had missed. The briefing continued, but Rebecca had heard enough. She moved away from the operations center, returning to the hospital with a weight settling in her chest. Something was coming. She could feel it the way animals feel earthquakes before they strike, a primal awareness that transcended conscious thought. The warrior inside her recognized the signs, recognized the building pressure of imminent violence. But the nurse, the identity she'd fought so hard to build, could only prepare her medical supplies and hope that when the storm broke, she'd be ready to handle the wounded. She had no way of knowing that in less than 72 hours, she'd need both identities, and that the line between healer and warrior was about to be erased entirely. The sun climbed over the eastern mountains, painting FOB Scorpion in shades of copper and gold. Rebecca stood at the edge of the hospital compound, ostensibly taking a break, but her eyes were tracing the terrain with the practiced assessment of someone who'd spent years studying ground for tactical advantage. The dried wadi ran southeast to northwest, a natural drainage channel carved by seasonal floods. From her position, she could see exactly what McAllister was missing: a 35-meter stretch where the wadi's depth and the angle of approach created a blind spot from the nearest observation post. An infantry squad could low crawl through that dead space and be at the hospital's eastern wall before anyone noticed. She'd seen it in 15 seconds. McAllister, with his 24 years of experience, apparently hadn't seen it at all. The generator building made it worse. The squat concrete structure sat at an angle that blocked the observation post's line of sight by at least 40 degrees. Attackers using the wadi could use the building for cover, setting up crew-served weapons within effective range of the hospital. Rebecca pulled a small notebook from her pocket, the kind nurses use for patient notes, and began sketching. Not medical information this time, but a tactical range card. Distances marked in meters, dead zones hatched with careful precision, likely avenues of approach marked with arrows, wind patterns, elevation changes, everything a trained scout sniper would document. It took her 8 minutes to complete. 8 minutes to document vulnerabilities that should have been identified and addressed weeks ago. She stared at her own handwriting, at the military-precise notations that had nothing to do with nursing and everything to do with a life she was supposed to have left behind. Then she made a decision that would change everything. At 0847 hours, she found Master Sergeant Rourke McAllister inspecting fighting positions along the northern perimeter. He was 48 years old, built like a fire hydrant, compact, solid, immovable. His weathered face bore the scars of multiple deployments, and his eyes carried the particular wariness of someone who'd seen too many things go wrong. "Master Sergeant," Rebecca called, approaching with her notebook. McAllister turned, his expression shifting from focused intensity to polite dismissiveness the moment he recognized her medical insignia. "Captain Caldwell, something I can help you with?" Rebecca opened her notebook, showing him the range card she'd drawn. "I wanted to talk to you about the eastern perimeter. I've mapped the approach from the wadi." McAllister glanced at the sketch, his eyebrows rising slightly. Then he looked at her with something between amusement and condescension. "Captain, that's actually a pretty detailed tactical assessment. Where'd a nurse learn to draw range cards?" "I read field manuals," Rebecca said evenly, "and I've been observing that terrain since I got here. Master Sergeant, this dead zone here, combined with the generator building's blind spot, it's a critical vulnerability." McAllister's smile was patient, the kind adults use with children who've said something charmingly naive. He took the notebook, studying her sketch more carefully. "I appreciate your concern, Captain, really I do. And this is impressive work for someone without infantry training." He handed the notebook back. "But that wadi is monitored. We've got overlapping sectors of fire. Even if someone tried to use it for approach, we'd light them up long before they reach the hospital perimeter. With respect, Master Sergeant, your observation post can't maintain coverage through the entire approach." "Captain," McAllister's voice took on a firmer edge, "I've been doing base security for 24 years. I've set up defensive perimeters in Iraq, Afghanistan, the Philippines, and half a dozen other places you've probably never heard of. I know what I'm doing." Rebecca felt heat rising in her chest, frustration mixing with something darker, the knowledge that she was right and he was wrong, and that his arrogance might get people killed. "I'm not questioning your experience, Master Sergeant. I'm just pointing out a vulnerability that could cost lives, that I've already assessed and deemed acceptable." McAllister's patience was wearing thin. "Captain, you focus on keeping our wounded stable. Let me focus on keeping the bad guys outside the wire. That's how this works." He turned back to his inspection, conversation clearly over. Rebecca stood there for a moment, the notebook heavy in her hand. She could push harder, could reveal exactly how she knew what she knew, could tell him that she'd set up ambush positions in Helmand and Kandahar, that she'd studied ground from hides for days at a time, that she understood terrain and fields of fire better than most infantry officers. But that would mean tearing down the carefully constructed wall between Rebecca Caldwell the nurse and Captain Rebecca Caldwell, scout sniper, serial number 0317. She walked away instead, the weight of unspoken knowledge pressing down on her shoulders. At 10:15 hours, she found herself in Colonel Grayson's path as he moved between buildings. It wasn't entirely coincidental. She'd positioned herself where she knew he'd pass, timed to look accidental. "Colonel, sir, may I have a moment?" Thaddeus Grayson was 52, with iron gray hair cut high and tight, and eyes that had seen everything the Marine Corps could throw at them. He'd earned his call sign Ironside in Fallujah, leading his company through 3 days of house-to-house fighting without rest. "Captain Caldwell, what can I do for you?" "Sir, it's about the eastern perimeter. I've observed what I believe is a significant tactical vulnerability." Grayson held up a hand, his expression carefully neutral. "Let me guess. The dried wadi approach, the dead zone created by terrain and the generator building." Rebecca blinked, surprised. "Yes, sir, exactly that. Master Sergeant McAllister called me 10 minutes ago. Said you'd approached him with tactical concerns. Grayson's eyes studied her face with uncomfortable intensity. Captain, where exactly did you learn to conduct tactical terrain analysis? The question hung in the air between them. Rebecca could feel the moment balanced on a knife's edge. The truth would solve the immediate problem. Grayson would listen to her assessment if he knew her background. But the truth would also destroy the life she'd built, the identity she'd chosen, the distance she'd created from the woman who'd killed 47 people. I've spent 3 years deployed, sir. You pick things up. Do you? It wasn't a question. Grayson's eyes never left her face. Captain, I appreciate your vigilance, and for what it's worth, I had Captain Locke run a second assessment of that eastern approach. She agrees there's reduced coverage in that sector. He paused. But Master Sergeant McAllister has 24 years of experience in force protection. If he says the risk is acceptable, I trust his judgment. Sir, with respect. Captain, Grayson's voice carried the weight of command now. I understand you're concerned, but we can't redesign our entire defensive posture based on a nurse's concerns about infantry tactics, no matter how well researched they might be. Master Sergeant McAllister is the subject matter expert here. Stand down. It was an order, not a suggestion. Yes, sir, Rebecca said, her voice flat. As Grayson walked away, she felt the familiar frustration of being dismissed, of knowing something critically important and having that knowledge rejected because she wore the wrong uniform, carried the wrong job title. If she'd walked into that meeting as Captain Caldwell, scout sniper, he would have listened, would have taken her assessment seriously, would have repositioned forces immediately. But she'd buried that identity under 3 years of nursing, and now she had to live with the consequences. The day crawled forward with agonizing slowness. Rebecca threw herself into her work, checking and rechecking her medical supplies, running inventory on trauma equipment, preparing the hospital for the casualties she knew were coming. At 13:47 hours, a Black Hawk helicopter thundered in with an emergency medical evacuation. IED strike on a convoy 20 kilometers south. 3 wounded Marines, all critical. The hospital erupted into controlled chaos. Rebecca's hands moved with mechanical precision, her training taking over. Start IV lines, control bleeding, assess for tension pneumothorax. Move, move, move. The first Marine had lost his left leg below the knee, the stump wrapped in a hasty tourniquet that had saved his life but left him screaming. Rebecca administered morphine, her voice steady and calm, even as her hands worked with brutal efficiency. You're going to be okay, Marine. I've got you. Major Reeves is the best trauma surgeon in theater. You're going to make it home. The second Marine had shrapnel wounds across his torso, dozens of small metal fragments that had turned his chest into a minefield. Not immediately life-threatening, but painful and requiring careful extraction. The third Marine wasn't screaming, wasn't moving. His pupils were blown, one larger than the other. Traumatic brain injury. Rebecca started an IV anyway, knowing it was probably futile, but unable to stop fighting. Major Reeves came out of the surgical suite at a run, taking one look at the 3 patients and making instant triage decisions. Caldwell, take the leg amputation. Get him stabilized for surgery. Hollis, you're on shrapnel wounds. Pick them clean. I want every fragment cataloged. I'll take the head injury. They worked for 6 hours straight. The leg amputation survived, stabilized and transferred to surgical suite for revision of the amputation site. The shrapnel victim was cleaned, packed, and sent to recovery. The Marine with the head injury died at 19:23 hours, despite everything they tried. He was 19 years old, from somewhere in Alabama, and he would never see his daughter, who was due to be born in 3 months. Rebecca stripped off her blood-crusted gloves in the scrub room, her hands shaking for the first time all day. Not from stress, not from exhaustion, but from the familiar weight of failure, of not being able to save someone who desperately needed saving. You did everything right. She turned to find Reeves standing in the doorway, equally blood-stained and exhausted. "He still died," Rebecca said quietly. "Traumatic brain injury with bilateral blown pupils. He was gone before he got here. We just didn't give up on him." Reeves moved closer, his voice dropping. "Captain, I've been doing combat surgery for 20 years. I've seen hundreds of medical personnel under this kind of pressure. You work for 6 hours without break, without coffee, barely any water. Where did you learn that kind of endurance?" Rebecca's jaw clenched. Here it was again, the question she couldn't fully answer without revealing truths she wasn't ready to speak. "Medical school teaches you a lot about functioning on no sleep, Major. Does it teach you to make battlefield triage decisions like someone with command experience? Does it teach you to maintain tactical awareness, even while you're wrist deep in someone's chest cavity?" Reeves wasn't being confrontational, just genuinely curious. "Because I watched you work today, Captain, and I've seen that level of performance exactly twice before in my career. Both times it was combat Marines who'd cross-trained as medics, people who'd learned to function in the absolute worst conditions imaginable." Rebecca met his eyes, weighing how much to give him, how much truth she could afford. "Everyone handles stress differently, Major. Maybe I'm just good at compartmentalizing." "Maybe," Reeves didn't look convinced. "Or maybe you've seen worse than this, done worse than this." He paused. "Your file says you've been a nurse for 3 years. But earlier you said 16 years deployed. That leaves 13 years unaccounted for, Captain. 13 years doing something that taught you to work under pressure like a seasoned combat veteran." The silence stretched between them. Rebecca could feel the walls closing in, the carefully constructed barriers beginning to crack. "Different life," she said finally. "Different person. I'd prefer to leave it in the past, sir." Reeves studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough. But Captain, whatever that past was, I'm glad it made you into the nurse you are today. We need people like you here." He left her alone in the scrub room, and Rebecca slumped against the sink, staring at her reflection in the cracked mirror. Blood on her scrubs, exhaustion in her eyes, and beneath it all, the ghost of the woman she used to be, pressing against the barriers she'd built, waiting for the moment those barriers would finally shatter. That moment came at 02:03 hours the following morning. Rebecca was checking vitals on Corporal Davies when she heard it, a sound most people would have missed or dismissed as distant thunder or aircraft engines. But Rebecca had heard that sound too many times to mistake it for anything else. The distinctive whistle of an incoming mortar round. Her body reacted before her conscious mind could process the information. Pure muscle memory from 4 combat tours, from dozens of indirect fire attacks, from training so deeply ingrained it bypassed rational thought entirely. "Incoming!" She was moving before the word finished leaving her mouth, diving toward PFC Jackson Walker, who stood frozen beside bed 3. Her body slammed into his, driving both of them to the floor behind a steel-frame bed, just as the first mortar round impacted 200 meters away. The explosion shook the hospital's plywood frame. Dust rained from the ceiling supports. Emergency lights flickered. Medical equipment rattled on metal shelves. Then came the second round, closer. Then the third. The base erupted into chaos. Alert sirens screamed. Return fire crackled from defensive positions. The distinct chatter of M240 machine guns mixing with the deeper thump of MK-19 grenade launchers. Rebecca's radio, clipped to her belt, exploded with frantic voices. "Contact west perimeter. Multiple hostiles in the wire. RPG, RPG, southwest tower. Contact north, contact north. Dismounted infantry, estimate 20 plus." Major Reeves stumbled out of the surgical suite, his eyes wide with shock. "What's happening?" Rebecca was already on her feet, her voice carrying a command authority that had nothing to do with nursing. "We're under attack, multiple indirect fire, probably 82mm mortars. Patterns suggest they're adjusting fire toward the hospital." She turned to Hollis, who stood paralyzed with fear. Get everyone away from the exterior walls. Move critical patients to the center of the ward now. Use mattresses for overhead cover where you can. Captain, how do you? Reeves started. Move! Rebecca's voice cracked like a rifle shot. Do it now or people die. The force of her command cut through their shock. Reeves and Hollis began organizing the controlled evacuation of patients from the vulnerable positions near the walls, dragging beds toward the center of the ward. Rebecca moved to the hospital entrance, pressing herself against the sandbag wall, peering through the gap between canvas and plywood. Outside, FOB Scorpion had transformed into a battlefield. Tracers cut through the darkness in brilliant arcs of red and green. Muzzle flashes strobed from fighting positions. Flares hung in the air, turning night into flickering, uncertain day. The main defensive line was holding. She could see Marines in their fighting positions, laying down disciplined fire. The insurgents had hit the western and northern perimeters hard, exactly as she would have done. Fix the enemy's attention, make them commit their reserves, then hit the real target from an unexpected direction. Her eyes snapped to the eastern perimeter, toward the dried wadi she'd warned about. Nothing visible yet, but every combat instinct she possessed was screaming, danger. Contact east side! Contact east side! The radio confirmed her worst fears. Multiple hostiles breaching the wire near the hospital. Time seemed to crystallize into perfect clarity. The sound of her own heartbeat became audible, a steady drum rhythm beneath the chaos. Her vision sharpened, peripheral awareness expanding. Adrenaline flooded her system, but instead of panic, it brought a cold, focused intensity she hadn't felt in 3 years. This was the moment. The moment where Rebecca Caldwell, the nurse, would have to become someone else, would have to reach back into a past she tried to bury and pull out skills she'd sworn never to use again. Outside, she could hear boots on gravel, moving fast. Combat-experienced fighters who knew exactly where they were going. The hospital's 4-man security detail rushed from their positions toward the breach, weapons raised. Muzzle flashes erupted in the darkness. The distinctive crack of AK-47 fire, multiple weapons firing in disciplined bursts. Corporal Danny Morris went down first, his body jerking as rounds tore through his chest. PFC Ryan Lee tried to return fire, managed 3 shots before bullets found him. He collapsed backward, his rifle clattering on the gravel. Master Sergeant McAllister appeared from the northern defensive position, his M4 barking as he engaged targets in the darkness. Rebecca saw the round hit him, saw his body twist, blood spraying from his left shoulder. He stumbled backward but kept firing, his training overriding the shock and pain. The last defender, Sergeant Owen Grant, was trying to drag McAllister to cover when return fire found him. Center mass. He dropped, his weapon falling from nerveless fingers. Rebecca's tactical mind was calculating with brutal efficiency. 12 hostile fighters visible, probably 13 or 14 total. A K-47s, at least 1 PKM machine gun from the sound, 2 RPG launchers. They moved with military precision, bounding by teams, covering each other's movement, not random insurgents, trained fighters, probably Taliban regulars, maybe even former Afghan army who'd switched sides. The math was simple and terrible. 4 defenders, 2 of them wounded critically, 1 wounded but still fighting, against 13 or 14 attackers who had momentum, surprise, and superior numbers. McAllister was still shooting, but Rebecca could see him weakening, see the blood loss taking its toll. He had maybe 90 seconds before shock set in, maybe 2 minutes before he lost consciousness. The insurgents were 60 meters from the hospital entrance, 55, 50. Behind her, Reeves appeared at her shoulder. Jesus Christ, they're coming right for us. Rebecca's mind split into 2 tracks. The nurse calculating triage for incoming wounded, the warrior counting enemy fighters, assessing their weapons, analyzing their tactics, calculating the odds. 45 meters. 40. She turned to Reeves, and something in her eyes made him take an involuntary step backward. Get everyone to the surgical suite. Barricade the door with supply cabinets, medical equipment, anything heavy. Put mattresses over the patients for fragmentation protection. Her voice was absolutely steady, carrying a command presence that seemed to come from somewhere deep and dark inside her. Do it now, Major. That's not a request. What are you going to do? But Rebecca was already moving, sprinting in a low crouch toward where Sergeant Grant lay motionless near the entrance. She hit the ground in a controlled slide that years of training had made automatic, ignoring the gravel tearing through her scrubs. Her hands found Grant's M4 rifle, muscle memory taking over. Press check, round chambered. Magazine check, 23 rounds. Selector switch from safe to semi-automatic. The rifle settled into her hands like greeting an old friend she'd tried to forget. The weight was familiar, the balance was perfect. Every control was exactly where her fingers expected it to be. Caldwell, what the hell? Reeves's voice started behind her. Go! The word came out as a roar. Get them to safety, now! Two Taliban fighters appeared at the hospital entrance, moving fast, weapons raised, already firing. They were young, early 20s, with the lean, hard look of men who'd spent their entire adult lives at war. Rebecca's rifle came up with practiced smoothness. No thought, no hesitation. Just training that had been drilled into her for 8 months at Scout Sniper School and refined through 4 combat tours. 3 controlled shots in 0.8 seconds. Center mass on the first fighter. Center mass on the second fighter. Failure drill to the second fighter's head when he didn't go down after the first hit. Both men dropped like puppets with cut strings. The transformation was complete, instant, absolute. Captain Rebecca Caldwell, gentle night nurse, ceased to exist. In her place stood someone else entirely. A woman who'd earned the call sign Raven, not for any noble reason, but because her teammates said she was the angel of death, watching from above, patient and inevitable. A Marine Scout sniper who'd once held the battalion record for confirmed kills. A woman who'd spent 47 separate moments looking through a rifle scope at another human being and making the conscious decision to end their life. And now, in defense of the wounded and helpless in the hospital behind her, she was about to add to that count. Rebecca moved to the entrance, using the canvas wall as concealment, her body automatically settling into a tactical stance that was as natural as breathing. Through the gap, she could see the Taliban assault force repositioning, reacting to the sudden resistance. One fighter was advancing on McAllister's position, trying to flank the wounded Master Sergeant. Rebecca's shot took him in the side of the neck. He went down, clutching his throat, blood spraying between his fingers. Holy shit, McAllister gasped from behind his barrier, staring at her with wide eyes. Caldwell, are you? Stay down, Master Sergeant, Rebecca commanded, already tracking the next threat. That's an order. She moved out from behind cover, sprinting in a low crouch toward McAllister's position. Rounds cracked past her head, so close she felt the pressure waves, but her body was moving with the automatic efficiency of someone who'd trained for exactly this scenario hundreds of times. She reached McAllister, grabbed his armor carrier with her free hand, and dragged him backward toward the hospital entrance. He was a solid 200 pounds of muscle and gear, but adrenaline and desperation gave her strength she shouldn't have possessed. You're a goddamn shooter, McAllister wheezed through his pain, his eyes taking in the way she moved, the way she handled her weapon, the tactical precision of every action. How the hell? Later, Rebecca cut him off, propping him against sandbags inside the entrance. She took his spare magazines, 4 of them, 30 rounds each, 120 additional rounds. Can you still fight? McAllister looked down at his wounded shoulder, then back up at her. Blood was soaking through his uniform, but his right arm still worked. He raised his M4 with his good hand. Always, ma'am. Rebecca allowed herself the ghost of a smile. Good, because we're about to get busy. An AK-47 opened up from 50 meters out, stitching rounds across the hospital's exterior canvas. Rebecca dropped flat, counting muzzle flashes. 4 shooters visible, probably more in reserve. They were regrouping. They'd realized they were facing more than terrified medical staff. They'd adapted, moving more cautiously now, using proper fire and movement tactics. But they'd made a critical mistake. They'd given her time to prepare. Inside the hospital, she could hear Reeves shouting orders, patients crying out in fear, equipment crashing as they built makeshift barricades. PFC Jackson Walker appeared beside her, holding a rifle he barely knew how to use, his face pale but determined. "Captain, I can help." Rebecca looked at the young Marine, 19 years old, still recovering from IED wounds, probably never fired his weapon outside of qualification ranges. "Jackson, get back to—" Her words died as she saw more insurgents emerging from the darkness. 6 more. No, 7. They'd committed their entire assault force. 20 fighters total, and she dropped 3. 17 attackers against her. A wounded master sergeant and a terrified 19-year-old kid who could barely hold his rifle steady. The math was brutal. The odds were impossible. But Rebecca had faced impossible odds before, had spent days alone in hostile territory, had talked her way out of ambushes, fought her way through sieges, survived situations that should have killed her. And now, with 32 wounded men depending on her, with doctors and medics and patients who couldn't fight back, she reached down into the deepest part of herself, the part she'd tried to bury, the part that was carved from violence and tempered in blood. The wolf. "Jackson," she said quietly, her voice carrying absolute certainty despite the chaos. "You're going to listen to me very carefully. When they come, you're going to aim center mass. Short, controlled bursts, 3 to 5 rounds. Don't try to be a hero. Just keep them outside these walls." "What about you, ma'am?" Rebecca checked her rifle one more time. 23 rounds in the magazine, 4 spare magazines. Captured AK-47 from one of the dead insurgents, 30 more rounds. 173 total rounds against 17 fighters who wanted everyone in this hospital dead. She looked at Jackson, and something in her eyes made the young Marine straighten despite his fear. "I'm going to do what I was trained to do." Outside, the Taliban commander shouted orders in Pashto. Rebecca understood enough to know what was coming. They were preparing the final assault. They'd hit the hospital from 3 sides simultaneously, overwhelming any defense through sheer numbers and firepower. She thought of the patients behind her, thought of Corporal Davy still struggling to breathe, thought of the Afghan boy who'd lost his mother, thought of all the men who were far from home and hurting and unable to protect themselves. She thought of Priest dying in her arms, of the brothers and sisters she'd lost because she wasn't fast enough, wasn't good enough, wasn't there when they needed her most. She'd become a nurse to save lives instead of taking them. But tonight, saving lives meant becoming who she used to be. "Here they come," McAllister said quietly, his voice steady despite the blood loss. Rebecca settled into a firing position, her breathing slowing, her heart rate dropping, her mind entering that crystalline state of combat focus where time stretched and every detail became hyper-real. "Let them come," she said. The hospital doors exploded inward as hell arrived with muzzle flashes and screaming, and Rebecca Caldwell finally stopped running from the woman she used to be. The first insurgent through the door never saw Rebecca. His eyes were focused on the beds, on the vulnerable patients, on the soft targets he'd been sent to destroy. He was raising his AK-47, finger already on the trigger, when her double tap caught him center mass. The 5.56 millimeter rounds punched through his chest with devastating effect. He crumpled forward, his momentum carrying him into a medical cart that crashed over with a metallic clang that seemed impossibly loud, even in the chaos of gunfire. The second fighter was smarter. He used his dead comrade as cover, sweeping the room with his weapon, trying to locate the threat. But Rebecca had already moved, flowing behind a support beam with the fluid grace that came from years of training in urban combat. She angled out from cover, putting 3 rounds into his side before he could acquire her position. He went down hard, his rifle clattering across the plywood floor. 2 down in 4 seconds. "Contact left," McAllister shouted from the entrance, his M4 barking. An insurgent trying to flank through the supply corridor jerked backward, hit in the shoulder, but he kept moving, driven by adrenaline or ideology, or both. Rebecca's follow-up shot caught him in the head. He dropped like a stone. 3 down. The hospital had transformed into a maze of death. Canvas walls provided concealment, but no protection. Insurgents poured through breaches, and Rebecca moved through the chaos like smoke, appearing from behind equipment, killing with mechanical precision, vanishing before return fire could find her. A fighter rounded a corner and came face to face with her at point-blank range. He was young, maybe 20 years old, with fear and fury burning in his dark eyes. His weapon was coming up, but Rebecca's rifle was already level. She didn't hesitate, couldn't hesitate. In close-quarters combat, hesitation measured the difference between living and dying in fractions of seconds. Her shot took him in the throat. He went down choking on his own blood, his hands clutching at the wound that would kill him in less than a minute. 4 down. Rebecca felt nothing. No satisfaction, no remorse, just the cold mechanical efficiency of a woman doing what she'd been trained to do. What she'd done 47 times before across 4 combat tours. The killing part was easy. It was the aftermath that destroyed you. Jesus Christ, Caldwell. Major Reeves had appeared from the surgical suite, his face pale with shock. He'd been watching through a crack in the barricade, seeing the gentle nurse he thought he knew transformed into something from a nightmare or a battlefield legend. "Stay back," Rebecca commanded, ejecting an empty magazine and slamming a fresh one home. The motion was so automatic, so perfectly executed, that Reeves finally understood. This wasn't training, this was identity. An RPG round streaked through the entrance, impacting against the sandbag wall and detonating with a concussive blast that knocked equipment off shelves. The explosion left Rebecca's ears ringing, but she was already moving, already shooting. 2 more insurgents down, both caught in the open trying to rush her position. 6 down, 14 remaining. PFC Jackson was pinned behind an overturned bed, an insurgent advancing on his position with methodical determination. The boy fired wildly, his hands shaking too badly for accuracy, rounds going wide. Rebecca's shot took the attacker in the head from 30 feet away. The man dropped instantly, his body sprawling across the floor. Jackson stared at her with eyes that mixed terror with something like awe. "Breathe, Marine," Rebecca said, her voice somehow calm despite the gunfire. "Control what you can control. Check your sector." 7 down. The insurgents had realized they were facing a serious defender. Their assault began to falter, fighters seeking cover instead of rushing forward. They adapted quickly, using suppressive fire, moving more cautiously. Rebecca counted rounds in her head. 16 left in the M4. McAllister's 4 spare magazines gave her 120 more. The captured AK-47 had maybe 30 rounds. 166 total rounds against approximately 13 remaining attackers. Not enough. Not nearly enough if this turned into a sustained firefight. She needed to be more efficient, needed to make every shot count. An insurgent exposed himself for half a second, trying to locate her position. Rebecca's single shot caught him in the chest. He fell back behind cover, whether dead or wounded, she couldn't tell, but he was out of the fight. 8 down. Movement in her peripheral vision. Rebecca spun, rifle coming up, and found herself looking at an insurgent who'd somehow gotten within 10 feet of her position. He was lunging forward with a knife, young and fast and desperate. No time for the rifle. No time for anything except instinct and training. Rebecca dropped the M4, her hands moving with automatic precision through techniques she'd learned at Marine Corps martial arts program training. She redirected his knife thrust, using his momentum against him. Her elbow smashed into his face, breaking his nose with a crack she felt through her bones. Before he could recover, she grabbed the combat knife from her own belt, taken from Grant's body, and drove it into his kidney. The blade went in smooth and came out wet. The insurgent made a sound that wasn't quite a scream, more like all the air being forced from his lungs at once. He collapsed and Rebecca was already moving, already scooping up her rifle. 9 down. "Behind you!" Jackson screamed. Rebecca spun, caught an insurgent climbing through a torn section of canvas wall. Her shot hit him mid-climb. He hung there for a moment, suspended by the canvas, then slid down, leaving a red smear on the material. 10 down. The firefight had been raging for maybe 4 minutes, an eternity in combat time. Rebecca's scrubs were soaked with sweat and blood, some hers from minor cuts, most from other people. Her hands were steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins like liquid lightning. Around her, the hospital was destroyed, equipment shattered, walls torn, beds overturned. Shell casings littered the floor in brass constellations. But the patients in the surgical suite were still alive, protected by Reeves's barricade and Rebecca's lethal efficiency. She counted bodies. 10 insurgents down, maybe 11. That left approximately 9 or 10 still in the fight, and her ammunition situation was getting critical. "Caldwell," McAllister called from his position, his voice weak from blood loss. "They're regrouping. I can hear them coordinating out there." Rebecca moved to the entrance, using the sandbag wall for cover, and risked a look outside. McAllister was right. The remaining insurgents had pulled back to about 75 meters, taking cover behind the generator building and scattered equipment. They were no longer rushing in blindly. They were planning something, a coordinated assault. All remaining fighters hitting from multiple angles simultaneously. And she had maybe 60 rounds left. The math was simple and brutal. If they rushed her position all at once, she couldn't kill them fast enough to stop them all. Some would make it through. And once they got past her, they'd slaughter everyone in the surgical suite. Rebecca's tactical mind raced through options. She needed to change the dynamics, needed to do something they wouldn't expect. Then she saw it. The generator building that had been blocking the observation post's sightline, the same building the insurgents were using for cover now. And she remembered that it held not just generators, but also fuel drums, diesel and gasoline, stored in 50-gallon containers. "McAllister," she called quietly, "you still have that grenade?" The master sergeant checked his vest with his good hand, producing an M67 fragmentation grenade. "1. Why?" "I need you to throw it at the generator building. Can you make that distance with your wounded shoulder?" McAllister looked at the building, calculating. 75 meters, with his good arm, with blood loss making him weak. "I can make it, ma'am, but why?" Then understanding dawned in his eyes. "The fuel drums." "The fuel drums," Rebecca confirmed. "On my mark, 3 seconds after detonation, I'm going out there. Jackson, you keep anyone from coming through that entrance. You don't need to be accurate, just keep them suppressed." "Ma'am, going out there is suicide," McAllister started. "Master Sergeant, throw the goddamn grenade." McAllister pulled the pin, his face set with determination despite the pain. "Frag out." The grenade arced through the darkness, tumbling end over end. It hit the ground 3 feet from the generator building, rolled, and detonated with a sharp crack. The fragmentation alone wouldn't have done much, but the shrapnel punctured 2 fuel drums. Diesel sprayed across hot generator engines. The explosion that followed was spectacular. A rolling fireball climbed into the night sky, turning darkness to day. The insurgents who'd been using the building for cover were caught in the blast. Some died instantly. Others ran, burning, screaming. Rebecca was already moving, sprinting out of the hospital entrance in a low crouch. The firelight eliminated her night vision disadvantage, painting everything in harsh orange and black. She caught the first insurgent silhouetted against the flames. Single shot, center mass. He dropped. 11 down. The second fighter was running, trying to escape the inferno. Rebecca's shot took him in the back. He fell forward and didn't get up. 12 down. A third insurgent appeared from behind cover, his weapon coming up. Rebecca and he fired simultaneously. His rounds went wide. Hers didn't. He crumpled. 13 down. Caldwell, 2 on your 6. McAllister's voice cracked over the chaos. Rebecca spun, dropping to one knee. 2 fighters rushing her position from the wadi, their faces masks of rage and determination. Time seemed to slow. Rebecca's breathing entered that perfect rhythm she'd learned at Scout Sniper School. Inhale, exhale, natural respiratory pause. Her first shot took the lead fighter in the chest. He stumbled but kept coming, driven by momentum and adrenaline. Her second shot took him in the head. He went down hard. The second fighter made it to within 20 feet before her shots found him. 3 rounds, all center mass. He dropped. 15 down. The sound of American firepower suddenly filled the night. The quick reaction force had finally broken through, their M4s and machine guns tearing into what remained of the insurgent assault force from their exposed flank. The remaining Taliban fighters broke and ran, dragging wounded with them, fading back into the darkness beyond the base perimeter. Rebecca stood in the firelight, her rifle finally lowering, her body beginning to shake as the adrenaline started to fade. Around her, the hospital was a war zone. Bodies sprawled in grotesque positions. Blood pooled on plywood floors. The acrid smell of gunpowder mixed with burning fuel and the copper tang of spilled blood. But through the chaos, she could hear voices from the surgical suite. Alive. Still alive. Hospital secure. Marines were shouting as they swept through, clearing rooms with professional efficiency. Clear. Clear. Building secure. Major Reeves emerged from the barricade, stepping carefully over bodies, his eyes finding Rebecca in the wreckage. He stopped 3 feet away, seeing her fully for the first time. This woman who'd saved them all, covered in blood and cordite, holding her weapon like an extension of her own body. Captain Caldwell, he said quietly. His voice carried no fear, no judgment, just a kind of awed understanding. Who are you? Really? Rebecca looked at him, then at the bodies around her, then at her own blood-stained hands. The wolf inside her was quiet now, retreating back into the shadows of her mind. But she knew, when needed again, it would return. Just Rebecca, Major, she said quietly. The confusion in his eyes cleared slightly, but before he could respond, Colonel Grayson's voice crackled over her radio. Caldwell, status report, now. Rebecca keyed her mic, her voice steady despite everything. Sir, hospital secure. Multiple enemy KIA. Our casualties are Master Sergeant McAllister, with GSW to shoulder, 2 security personnel KIA, all patients stable. A pause on the other end. Then, Captain, how many enemy did you engage? Rebecca looked at the bodies littering the hospital, counted them silently. Approximately 15, sir. Maybe more. Hard to get exact count with QRF engaging simultaneously. Another longer pause. 15. You engaged 15 hostiles. As a nurse. Yes, sir. Captain Caldwell, remain in position. I'm coming to you. Rebecca secured her weapon and moved to McAllister, her training as a nurse reasserting itself. She checked his wound, applied pressure to slow the bleeding, started an IV line. Ma'am, McAllister said weakly, his eyes studying her face. Who the hell are you? Before Rebecca could answer, PFC Jackson appeared beside them, his face streaked with tears and smoke. Captain, you saved us, all of us. Rebecca looked at the young Marine, seeing herself years ago. Young, scared, trying to understand how the world could contain so much violence. Jackson, breathe. You did good. You held your position. That's all anyone can ask. But you weren't afraid. You were so calm. I was terrified, Rebecca admitted, surprising herself with the honesty. Every second of that firefight, I was scared. Scared for you, for the major, for the patients. Fear doesn't go away with experience, Marine. You just learn to function through it. Colonel Grayson arrived 10 minutes later with his command staff, including Captain Vivian Locke, the S2 intelligence officer. They stood in the entrance of the destroyed hospital, taking in the carnage with professional assessment. Grayson's eyes found Rebecca, still kneeling beside McAllister, her hands working to stabilize the wounded Master Sergeant, even as her scrubs dripped blood. Captain Caldwell, his voice was carefully neutral. Master Sergeant McAllister had some interesting things to say about your performance during this engagement. Rebecca stood slowly, meeting her commanding officer's eyes. Sir, I did what was necessary to protect the patients under my care. Necessary. Grayson repeated the word like he was tasting it. Master Sergeant McAllister, despite his wounds, was quite detailed in his radio report. He described tactical movement consistent with advanced infantry training, weapon handling that suggested extensive combat experience, shot placement that he characterized as, and I quote, "goddamn artist-level marksmanship." Rebecca said nothing. There was nothing to say. Grayson turned to Captain Locke. Captain, you pulled Caldwell's service jacket earlier, the nursing file. Pull her complete military record, original jacket from her first day in the Marine Corps. Locke's fingers flew over her tablet. Her eyes widened as she read, then widened further. Sir, oh my God. Read it aloud, Captain. Locke's voice shook slightly. Caldwell, Rebecca Ann, Captain, United States Marine Corps, MOS 0317. She paused. Sir, that's Scout Sniper. The Marine standing nearby went still. That particular military occupational specialty carried weight. Respect. Scout snipers were the elite, the silent professionals, the Marines who operated alone or in pairs, deep in enemy territory. Locke continued reading. Scout Sniper School, honor graduate. Scout Sniper Advanced Skills, distinguished graduate. Her voice dropped lower. Confirmed kills, 47. Someone whistled softly. 47 confirmed kills was exceptional. Most snipers retired with fewer than 20. Decorations, Grayson prompted. Silver Star with Valor device, 2 bronze stars, 3 Purple Hearts. Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal. Combat Action Ribbon. Locke looked up from her tablet. Sir, there's a classified section here that requires higher clearance to access. Later. Grayson's eyes never left Rebecca's face. Captain Caldwell, why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you tell anyone what you were? Rebecca's jaw clenched. The question she'd been dreading for 3 years. The question she'd hoped she'd never have to answer. Because I didn't want to be that person anymore, sir. Her voice was steady, but carried an undertone of pain. I wanted to save people, not kill them. I thought I could leave it behind. Thought I could be someone different. You saved 32 lives tonight, Captain. Patients, staff, wounded soldiers. I killed 15 people. The words came out flat, emotionless. The math doesn't balance, Colonel. It never does. Grayson stepped closer, his voice dropping so only she could hear. Those 15 people were trying to murder civilians and wounded soldiers under our protection. That's not murder, Captain. That's war. And whether you want to admit it or not, you're damn good at it. Before Rebecca could respond, Captain Locke's tablet chimed urgently. She glanced at it, her face paling. Sir, S2 just intercepted new SIGINT. The attack tonight wasn't the main assault. It was a probe. She looked up, her eyes wide. The real assault force, 40-plus fighters with mortars and recoilless rifles, is staging in Korengal Valley, 800 meters northeast. They're coordinating a dawn bombardment. Grayson's expression hardened. Our counter-battery radar? Damaged in the mortar attack, sir. We're blind. They have a forward observer? SIGINT confirms FO on Hill 384, approximately 700 meters from our position. He's directing the mortar crews. The implication was clear. Without counter-battery capability, without the ability to locate and suppress the enemy mortars, the next attack would be devastating. The hospital was already destroyed. A concentrated mortar barrage would finish the job, killing everyone inside. Everyone in the room turned to look at Rebecca. Grayson's voice was quiet, but carried the weight of command. "Captain Caldwell, we have no designated marksman. Sergeant Kowalski is in surgery with a collapsed lung. You're the only qualified sniper on this entire base." He opened a rifle case that someone had brought from the armory. Inside lay an M40A5 sniper rifle, the Marine Corps' primary long-range precision weapon, a Night Force scope mounted on top, a Harris bipod, everything a sniper would need. "Can you make a 700-meter shot at dawn with thermal inversions against a dug-in forward observer?" Rebecca stared at the rifle. She hadn't touched one in 3 years, hadn't looked through a scope since the day she decided that Captain Rebecca Caldwell, scout sniper, needed to die so that Captain Rebecca Caldwell, nurse, could be born. "Sir," her voice was barely above a whisper, "my longest confirmed shot was 1,247 meters, but that was a different life. Captain, that life is the only thing standing between us and a massacre." Grayson's eyes bore into hers. "I'm not ordering you to do this. I'm asking, will you take the shot?" Rebecca looked at the rifle, thought about Priest, her spotter, who died in her arms. Thought about the 47 people she'd already killed. Thought about the weight of those deaths that she carried every single day. Then she thought about the patients in the surgical suite, about Corporal Davies struggling to breathe, about the little Afghan boy who'd already lost his mother, about Jackson, who'd stood his ground despite his terror, about all the people who couldn't protect themselves. And she understood, finally, that running from who she was didn't make her a better person. It just made her unable to protect the people who needed her most. Her hands reached for the rifle case. The moment her fingers touched the M40A5, muscle memory flooded back. The weight, the balance, the cold certainty of what this weapon was designed to do. "I'll need a spotter, sir." McAllister, being treated by medics nearby, spoke up despite his wounds. "I'll do it, ma'am." "Master Sergeant, you're wounded." "I can still read wind and call adjustments, Captain." McAllister's eyes held something new now. Not the dismissiveness from before. Respect. "And you'll need someone watching your six. I'd consider it an honor." Rebecca nodded slowly. "All right, give us 20 minutes to get into position." 23 minutes later, Rebecca lay prone on the eastern observation post, the M40A5 resting on sandbags, her eye pressed to the scope. Beside her, McAllister scanned through binoculars, his wounded shoulder braced against padding. The pre-dawn darkness was beginning to fade, that strange, gray time when night gives way to day, but neither fully dominates. "Target area, northeast, 430 meters, McAllister murmured, falling into the ancient rhythm of spotter and shooter. "Elevation angle, 8 degrees. Wind left to right, estimates 7 knots gusting to 10. Rebecca's breathing slowed automatically, her heart rate dropping, training and instinct taking over. Her hands performed the ritual of preparation without conscious thought. Check scope 0. Confirm ammunition, 168 grain federal gold medal match. Record atmospheric conditions. Through the scope, she could see the insurgent position, figures moving in the pre-dawn darkness, setting up equipment, coordinating. And there, partially concealed behind a generator housing, the forward observer directing operations with hand signals. "I have eyes on target," Rebecca whispered. "Adult male, dark clothing, directing fighters. Partially concealed, limited exposure window." "Confirmed. That's your shot, ma'am." McAllister's voice was steady despite his pain. "Wind steady at 9 knots. No mirage yet. Temperature still low." Rebecca's mind fell into the familiar meditation of the sniper. Distance, wind, elevation. humidity, temperature, Coriolis effect, spin drift, 1,000 variables condensed into a single moment, a single decision, a single pull of the trigger. She'd done this 47 times before, each one burned into her memory like brands, each one a weight she carried. But this would be different. This wasn't just another kill. This was a conscious choice to pick up the rifle again, to embrace the identity she tried to bury, to accept that saving lives sometimes meant taking them. Through the scope, the forward observer shifted, exposing himself briefly as he gestured to his fighters. Rebecca's crosshairs settled on his center mass, her finger finding the trigger with familiar intimacy. She thought of Priest bleeding out in her arms, of the Marines she couldn't save, of the patients sleeping in the hospital behind her, protected by violence they'd never know about. And she understood finally that warrior and healer weren't opposites. They were two sides of the same commitment: protect life at all costs. Wind call, she asked softly. 9 knots steady, hold 1 mil right. Rebecca adjusted. Her breathing entered that perfect rhythm. Inhale, exhale, natural respiratory pause. The world narrowed to the space between heartbeats. She saw her past in the scope's view. Every shot she'd taken, every life she'd ended, every nightmare that followed. She saw her present too, the nurse who healed, who comforted, who chose life over death. And she understood they were the same person, not contradictory, not opposite, but two sides of a single identity. The warrior protected, the healer saved. Both were necessary, both were her. Shooter ready, Rebecca whispered. Send it. The rifle kicked against her shoulder with familiar authority. Through the scope, she watched the round travel across 700 meters of Afghan morning and strike true. The forward observer jerked backward, the 7.62 millimeter round punching through his chest. He crumpled. Hit confirmed, McAllister called quietly. Target down. Beautiful shot, ma'am. But Rebecca was already working the bolt, chambering another round, acquiring the next target. A fighter trying to rally the others, directing them toward the mortar position. She led him slightly, compensating for his movement, and fired. He went down. Second target neutralized. The insurgent force was in chaos now, leaderless and panicked. Some tried to man the mortars anyway. Rebecca's third shot destroyed the mortar's sight mechanism, rendering it useless. Her fourth caught a fighter trying to shoulder fire an RPG at the base. Her fifth and sixth dispersed the remaining insurgents, sending them fleeing into the hills. 6 shots, 6 hits. The secondary assault broken before it could begin. Rebecca lowered the rifle slowly, her hands steady despite the emotional earthquake inside her chest. She'd just killed 3 more men. She'd protected 200 lives. Both were true. Both mattered. Outstanding shooting, ma'am, McAllister said quietly. Command will want you to train our scouts. That was textbook sniper work. Rebecca didn't respond. She was staring at the rifle in her hands, at the instrument that had defined so much of her life. She'd thought she could leave it behind, bury it with her old identity. But tonight had proven the truth. You couldn't bury part of yourself. You could only accept it, integrate it, learn to live with both the light and shadow inside your soul. Behind them, the quick reaction force mobilized to pursue the fleeing insurgents. The immediate threat was over. The hospital was safe. 32 lives protected by 9 precision shots from a woman who tried to stop being a killer and learned she could be both killer and healer simultaneously. Ma'am, McAllister said gently, you okay? Rebecca thought about the question. Was she okay? She'd killed 18 men in one night, 15 in close combat, 3 from distance. She'd saved 32 lives. She'd confronted the identity she'd tried to escape and discovered it was inseparable from who she'd become. I don't know, Master Sergeant, she admitted, but I will be. She secured the rifle and stood, looking back at the hospital where Reeves was still working, where Jackson was recovering, where patients slept peacefully, protected by violence they'd never fully understand. The sun was beginning to rise now, painting the Afghan sky in shades of pink and gold. A new day, a new understanding. Rebecca Caldwell. Marine Scout sniper and trauma nurse. Warrior and healer. Both. Always both. She picked up the rifle case and walked back toward the hospital, carrying both her identities with her, no longer trying to choose between them, but learning finally to embrace them both. And for the first time in 3 years, Rebecca felt something close to peace with that truth. The next hours passed in a blur of controlled chaos. Rebecca returned to the hospital, transitioning immediately back into her role as nurse. The cognitive dissonance of moving from sniper to healer in the span of minutes would have broken most people. But Rebecca had learned long ago how to compartmentalize, how to wall off the parts of herself that needed to be contained so the necessary parts could function. McAllister was taken to surgery, his shoulder wound requiring extensive repair, but ultimately survivable. Corporal Davies was stable. The Afghan boy was recovering. The patients who'd survived the attack were shaken but alive. At 08:47 hours, Colonel Grayson returned to the hospital with his command staff. Rebecca was suturing a minor laceration on one of the security personnel when he approached. "Captain Caldwell, we need to talk. Now." Rebecca finished the last stitch, applied a dressing, and followed Grayson outside. Her stomach clenched. This was it, the reckoning. You couldn't kill 18 men, even in defense, without consequences. "Sir," she started. Grayson held up a hand. "Captain, I pulled your full service record, the classified sections too." His weathered face was unreadable. 4 combat tours before you transitioned to nursing. 47 confirmed kills before last night. Silver Star for actions in Helmand Province, where you held a position for 8 hours alone after your unit was overrun, killing 17 enemy fighters and calling in fire support that saved your platoon. Rebecca said nothing. What could she say? "Why didn't you tell us who you were?" "Because I didn't want to be that person anymore, sir." Rebecca's voice cracked slightly. "After Priest, after Staff Sergeant Hawkins died, I couldn't pull another trigger. Couldn't watch another friend die. So I left, used my GI Bill for nursing school, convinced myself that healing could replace destroying, that saving lives could balance the ones I'd taken." Grayson studied her for a long moment. "You saved 32 lives last night, Captain. Patients, staff, wounded soldiers. If you hadn't been here, hadn't been who you were," he shook his head, "the Taliban would have massacred everyone in that hospital." "I still killed 18 people, sir." The words tasted like ash. 18 human beings who woke up yesterday morning alive. 18 enemy combatants who were trying to murder civilians and wounded soldiers under our protection, Grayson corrected firmly. "That's not murder, Captain. That's war. And whether you like it or not, you're exceptionally good at it." Before Rebecca could respond, Captain Locke approached, her tablet in hand. "Sir, I have the after-action assessment you requested." Grayson gestured for her to continue. "Forensic analysis confirms Captain Caldwell engaged and neutralized 15 hostile fighters inside the hospital compound. Average engagement distance, 7 to 30 meters. Kill-to-shot ratio, approximately 1.2 to 1. Locke paused. "Sir, that's exceptional even for trained infantry. For a single operator against multiple targets in close quarters, it's extraordinary." "And the sniper shots?" 3 confirmed kills at ranges from 687 to 712 meters. All first-round hits. All high-value targets whose elimination resulted in collapse of enemy assault. Locke looked at Rebecca with undisguised respect. "Ma'am, your shooting this morning prevented what SIGINT estimates would have been 70 to 80 mortar rounds landing on this FOB. Casualty projections, if that bombardment had occurred, were catastrophic." Grayson nodded. "Captain Caldwell, I'm not here to reprimand you. I'm here to offer you something." He opened a folder. "We're establishing a new program, Combat Trauma Advisor, small unit tactics integration, training our corpsmen and nurses in tactical medicine under fire, teaching them to be both healers and protectors when necessary. Rebecca stared at the program outline. Everything she'd been forced to learn in the crucible of a single night, now systematized and taught. This is asking me to be both, sir, officially, not hiding one or the other. This is asking you to be exactly who you are, Grayson corrected, and to teach others that strength and compassion aren't opposites, they're partners. The program needs a director, someone who understands both worlds, someone who's lived in both worlds. He paused. I want you to lead it. Rebecca thought of Priest, who'd believed in her even when she doubted herself, thought of the 18 men she'd killed and the 32 lives she'd saved. Thought of the little Afghan boy who'd lost his mother but survived because Rebecca had been willing to do what was necessary. I'll do it, sir, on one condition. Name it. The program motto, first to heal, last to harm, always to protect. Her voice was steady now, certain. Healing is our first mission, always, but when protecting the innocent requires force, she paused, accepting the truth fully for the first time. Then we do what must be done. Grayson extended his hand. I'll have it written into the program charter, Captain. They shook, and Rebecca felt something shift inside her. Not the burden lifting. She'd carry those 18 deaths for the rest of her life. But the understanding that she didn't have to choose between identities. That warrior and healer weren't opposites, they were partners. That being both didn't make her a monster, it made her complete. 6 months later, FOB Scorpion had transformed. The hospital was rebuilt, stronger than before, with proper defensive positions integrated into its design. The Eastern Wadi approach that Rebecca had warned about was now covered by overlapping fields of fire, with a secondary observation post exactly where she'd recommended. Rebecca stood in front of 12 Marines, corpsmen, and nurses selected for her pilot program. They wore medical insignia, but they also wore the hard eyes of people who understood that sometimes saving lives required taking them. The difference between combat medicine and hospital medicine, Rebecca said, her voice carrying across the training area, is that you might have to neutralize the threat before you can treat the patient. You might have to kill someone to save someone else, and that will haunt you. It should haunt you. The day it stops bothering you is the day you've lost your humanity. PFC Jackson Walker sat in the front row, his leg fully healed now, his eyes focused with intensity. He'd requested transfer to the program the day it was announced. But, Rebecca continued, when the choice is between letting innocents die or doing violence to protect them, we choose protection. Every time. Without hesitation. And we live with the consequences, because that's what it means to serve. After class, Jackson approached her. Captain, thank you for teaching me, for saving me that night. Rebecca looked at the young Marine who'd stood his ground despite his terror. Jackson, you saved yourself. You held your position. That's all anyone can ask. Will you tell me about him? About Staff Sergeant Hawkins? Rebecca was quiet for a moment. Then, Priest was the best spotter in the battalion, best friend I ever had. He died because I wasn't fast enough, wasn't good enough. Her voice dropped. I became a nurse because I thought saving people could balance losing him. But it doesn't work that way. Loss doesn't balance. You just learn to carry it. Is that why you came back? To being a sniper? I didn't come back, Jackson. I just stopped pretending I was only one thing. Rebecca's eyes held his. The warrior protects. The healer saves. They're not different people. They're the same person choosing which tool the moment requires. 3 months after that, Rebecca stood at attention in front of 200 Marines at Camp Leatherneck. Major General Raymond Foster, commanding general of 1st Marine Expeditionary Force, approached with a blue ribbon and silver star suspended from it. Attention to orders, an adjutant read from official papers. Captain Caldwell, serving as medical officer at Forward Operating Base Scorpion, single-handedly defended a field hospital against a numerically superior enemy force, neutralizing 15 enemy combatants in close-quarters combat and conducting precision, long-range engagement of high-value targets, resulting in the protection of 32 coalition and Afghan civilian lives. The citation continued, but Rebecca barely heard it. She was thinking about Priest, about the 47 people she'd killed before that night, about the 18 she'd killed during it. General Foster pinned the Navy Cross on her uniform, then leaned close to whisper, "Hawkins would be proud, Captain." Rebecca's eyes burned with tears she refused to shed in front of 200 Marines. "He'd say I took too long to figure it out, sir." "Maybe," Foster stepped back, "but you figured it out. That's what matters." After the ceremony, a young second lieutenant approached, Kelsey Brennan, 24 years old, newly commissioned, with bright eyes and an idealistic belief that she could change the world. "Ma'am, I heard what you did, what you built with the program. I want to be part of it." Rebecca studied the young officer, seeing herself 8 years ago, young, determined, not yet broken by the weight of taking human life. "Lieutenant, this program will teach you to kill people, efficiently, effectively, and you'll carry every single one of those deaths for the rest of your life." She paused. "Are you sure that's what you want?" Brennan didn't hesitate. "Ma'am, if it means protecting people who can't protect themselves, then yes, that's exactly what I want." Rebecca nodded slowly. "Then report to FOB Scorpion next month. And Lieutenant, remember this. The best warriors are the ones who hate war the most. We fight because we must, not because we want to. Never forget that distinction." "Yes, ma'am." 2 months later, Rebecca stood at Arlington National Cemetery at the grave marker for Staff Sergeant Marcus Priest Hawkins. She laid her scout sniper insignia on the stone, her fingers tracing his name carved into white marble. "I finally understand, brother," she said quietly. "You can be both, warrior and healer, destroyer and protector. You taught me to take the shot. Medicine taught me to save the life. I don't have to choose. I just have to know which one the moment needs." She stood in silence for a long moment, then pulled out a photograph. Not the old one of their team in Afghanistan, a new one. Rebecca with her 12 program graduates, all standing at attention, all wearing both medical insignia and weapons. "We're calling it the Hawkins Protocol," she said. "First to heal, last to harm, always to protect. The Marine Corps is adopting it service-wide. Your name is going to train the next generation of warriors who understand that strength and compassion aren't opposites." The wind stirred the trees around the cemetery, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and distant rain. "I miss you, Priest, every damn day, but I'm not running anymore. Not from who I was, not from who I am." She touched the gravestone one last time. "The wolf and the dove, both living in the same soul. You always said I'd figure it out eventually." She walked away from the grave, carrying both her identities with her. No longer trying to choose between them. No longer ashamed of either. Just learning, finally, to embrace them both. Captain Rebecca Raven Caldwell, Marine Scout Sniper, trauma nurse, teacher, protector, warrior and healer, integrated at last. Behind her, carved into Priest's gravestone beneath his name and dates, was a new inscription she'd commissioned. "He taught warriors to protect. His legacy teaches healers to fight. First to heal, last to harm, always to protect." The sun set over Arlington, painting the white gravestones in shades of gold and shadow. Rebecca walked toward the cemetery gates, toward a rental car, toward a flight back to Quantico where 12 new students waited to learn the balance between saving lives and taking them. 65 lives taken, hundreds saved. The equation had no solution. But Rebecca had finally learned the point. Be ready when healing isn't enough, when protection requires violence, when the only way to save the innocent is to become what's necessary. Then, when that moment passes, return to healing. Choose compassion again. Remember that violence in service of protection isn't evil. It's love expressed in the only language some threats understand. First to heal, last to harm, always to protect. The wolf and the dove, dancing together in a single soul, each making the other stronger, each giving the other purpose. Rebecca drove away from Arlington as the sun finally set, heading toward whatever came next, carrying all of who she was, every light and shadow, every kill and every save, every nightmare and every moment of grace. Complete, integrated, finally at peace with the woman she'd always been and the woman she'd tried to become, understanding at last that they were the same person.